I was watching the interview with Prince Harry and I can't remember his name, Paul someone, I think it was. Bradley, I think it was. And whilst watching that, there was a newsreel, and Harry was walking behind his mother's coffin. And I was in bits, absolute bits, crying my eyes out. And one of the reasons was obviously I could relate to this guy. I could relate to exactly how he feels. And the fact that he had to do it in such a way he couldn't show emotion. And I think that's important because I talk about this on a regular basis, about the importance of research. I Googled this particular problem about certainly childhood traumas of a loss of a parent and the impact that has on their whole life, not their childhood, but their whole life. And we can take this as any trauma, whether it's a loss of a parent or whether it's abuse or something of that nature, something quite traumatic to the point of, we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the sort of thing we're talking about here. We're talking about that life-changing shit, right? The only time I really get upset if I watch a film is if I see a kid who's lost a parent. And that's because I can relate to it. That's because I know how they feel. And what tends to happen in life is that we just assume people get over things. We just assume in life, they're okay. I was listening to the broadcaster James O'Brien on LBC, and he's changed his tune on corporal punishment. And I'm giving sort of like an idea of really the basis of why I'm talking about this, because it's very important to understand how trauma manifests itself in a child's behavior. And he was talking about when he was at boarding school, ages of 10, 11, 12, and he would regularly get slippered or caned back when corporal punishment was legal. It's illegal to hit a child today. And we've got different ways of dealing with things. But the way to deal with it back in the 60s, 70s and 80s early 80s, was to give them a whack, if they've misbehaved. And I've got a condition called dyslexia. It's a direct consequence of my childhood. It's because of what happened to me. It stopped me from processing information that perhaps the average person would. And again, this is coming down to information that I've gleaned from my research, where there's a trauma in a child and it stops them from learning. Because what happens is it stops you from engaging in the world that you would do, because there's no nurturing like you would have in the normal situation. So, if you take the normal family, they might have a few problems. They might get hit now and again. They might have had a dad shout on them. They might have had their parents fighting, but it's normal stuff as you go along in life. But ultimately, both the parents would lay down and die for their kids. They'd lay down and die for them. And so at that normal nurtured scenario, the kids they develop in the right nurtured way. When something happens, trauma happens, that no longer happens to a child. And when I listened to James O'Brien change his tune from actually this, what I thought it was, this was, a good thing for children. Actually, the people or the kids that turned up on a regular basis to get caned with the same kids with similar problems. And it had manifested itself as bad behavior. It had manifested itself because they were suffering and no one knew. It was a cry for help. How can you misbehave knowing you're going to get the cane and actually sort of semi-looking forward to it? You'd convince yourself it wasn't going to hurt. It was like a badge of honor. You know, I've been caned or I've been slippered. Have you? It was in the class when you misbehaved. It was a badge of honor to give the teacher lip. It was a rebellious nature, but it was a cry for help. It was like saying, I'm hurting. Please give me some attention. Please look beyond what's going on. It's not me being a naughty child. It's me saying there's something going on here. And we missed this within, well, certainly in them times, we missed it completely. Today, I wouldn't slip through the net. Today, my stepmother would have been dragged in front of a court. We would have probably landed up in with other family members, or we would have landed up in some sort of home, and my stepmother would have been prosecuted. But it didn't happen in them days. So how do people deal with something so dramatic? Because it's very different today than it was in my day. And just as James O'Brien has seen the error of his ways, saying that corporal punishment was a good thing for children, and now knowing that wasn't the case. So having had children myself, I see it differently too. I grew up with a belief that I was a naughty kid. I was disloyal. I was disruptive. I was a bad influence. This one got me though. I was a bad influence, but I was easily led. Which one is it? You can't be both, right? You're either an influence or you're a follower. Which one is it? It was actually I was a bad influence on a lot of people. But I grew up with that label for many years, growing up, not having an education, not having any qualifications, and here's the thing. This is the kicker. It's what you do with it that counts. So I could have taken that badge of honor. I could have taken that, which I'll explain the story in a minute. I could have taken all them things, and it could have defined who I was. It could have defined, like the research I did, many people who have had drug abuse, alcohol abuse, systematically in different relationships, not doing particularly well in society. It could have defined me that way. But I didn't want that. I am completely different to what I was as a child and a younger man. Completely different. I'm so far removed from that person, it's ridiculous. We're talking a guy who couldn't even run 100 yards without collapsing on the floor with an asthma attack. I was a guy that couldn't read or write, and I'm a published author today. Today, I will go and ride 200 miles from London to Paris in one day. That's the difference between that guy then and this guy now. This guy here today helps people take shit situations and turning something worth fighting for. This is the guy who did that all that years ago, who does that for other people today. They come to me to get themselves sorted out. I'm so far removed from that guy, and I'm so proud of it. But without that guy, I wouldn't exist. If you find yourself in a situation where life's giving you a shit sandwich, then you need to listen. Because anything can change if you want to, but it starts with you. It starts inside here. It starts inside here. It starts with knowing that you want to be better than you've become. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I've been working on a program called Living Life by Design. And Living Life by Design, I see a lot of people in the consultancy, coaching, therapy space, and they talk about your goals, and you're going to, what do you want? And, we're going to break down your goals into smaller chunks and we're going to help you achieve that goal. But once you've got that goal, you're still the same person that you was prior to that goal. Whereas Living Life by Design is not about goals. There is a goal aspect of it, but that's way over here. This is about changing you on a deeper level and developing skills that make you a better person. Listening skills, communication skills. Just as I shed my skin all them years ago, as if I could describe it anyway, is coming from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It's that sort of process that you go through. And you have to ask yourself this question: who do I want to be? Your early traumas do not have to define you. You can make a choice and say, no, I'm going to go in a different direction. So I want to take you back to the 1960s. I was 3 years old. I was at my nan's house. They're my earliest memories. And it must have been between the ages of 3 and 6. And my 2 sisters were there. My aunt was there. My aunt's only about 5 years older than me, so she was like my big sister. And then I do remember my dad coming home, and I don't remember him being part of my life up until this sort of moment. And he introduced us to Auntie Pat. And he told us that Auntie Pat was going to be our new mum. And we was all excited to we're going to have a new mum. In order to take on another mum, you had to call her mum. And my new mother insisted that I called my mum Pam, my dead mother, my real mother. So it installed into me at a very early age disloyalty. And it, as you can see, it's upsetting me even to think about it now, that I could be that disloyal to my own mother, which it wasn't her fault that she'd passed. But I was so desperate to get a new mum. I wanted a mum. I wanted to be like everybody else who had a mum, because we weren't like everybody else. We were different. And the first time I realized my life would be different, completely different, was when my dad and my stepmother took us to the new property that we was going to live in. My nan drove us over and we're all excited, and she's taken us in, and Pat and Don were there. That's my dad and my stepmother. And she left us with some sweets, because my nan used to treat, my nan really, really spoiled me, because I'd lost my mum. So she spoiled me for the best part of 4 years. And as soon as my nan had gone, I remember having some Spangles. I can't remember what they're called nowadays. I think they renamed them, but they were called Spangles at the time. No, it's not Starburst. No, it's not Spangles. And as soon as my nan had gone, we were eating the sweets, and Pat came over, grabbed the sweets and went, "You greedy children." And she took these sweets away from us. And I call it Spangles Day, because there was a stark difference between Auntie Pat, who was going to become mum, to this stepmother who treated us so appallingly from that moment on. We were told certain things that, if you wanted something, just ask for it. And then, so we'd ask if we could have a banana or an apple or some chocolate or an ice cream. No, you can't, you greedy children. And if you get told that enough times, I can assure you, you feel deprived, because I come from my nan's safe home where they spoilt us rotten because we'd lost our mother, to this stepmother who was treating us like we were prisoners. And I was talking to my sisters and we just couldn't believe it, really. And then my brother was born, my half brother, it was her son, my dad's son, so it's my half brother. And he come along and he was treated completely differently. So over the next 10 years, we saw this kid get everything he ever wanted to. He was treated like royalty. So when I listened to stories of Prince Harry talking about him being spare and having his sibling treated completely differently to how he was being treated, I relate to this. I can see it. I feel it. And it didn't take me long before I found a rebellious streak. She wouldn't let me have the things, but she would give them to Chris, my brother. So in the end, I started to find ways to get them. So we would take them without asking. And we would stand in a line and there would be a metal coat hanger and she would whack us until one of us admitted or grasped on the other one. And we would stand there for hours having this treatment. And just as I said earlier, you make decisions in your life, choices. Now, I could have either been bullied and treated like this, and I took it probably till I was about 13. I went, enough's enough. I'm not having this. So I started stealing outside of the house to get what I wanted, because obviously that way I wouldn't get a whack with a coat hanger. I started misbehaving at school. I just completely rebelled against everything. And it was clear there was learning difficulties at school. And then I'd get whacked at home for having a bad report. Could try harder. He's got intelligence. That's something about dyslexia. Most dyslexic people are very intelligent. They just don't function the same way when it comes to academia. That's all. So I was told I had potential. But I wasn't living up to this potential. But they couldn't see that I was struggling reading and writing. And at 14, I had the reading age of a 7-year-old. And through all this, my mother was forgotten. My real mother. We weren't allowed to call her mum. We had to call her Pam. And then any traces of her were erased. There was no photographs. She wasn't allowed to be referred to in the home. But I can't explain to you how devastating that effect has on a child, because when it first happened, I do remember being very distant, very insular. I kept myself. I was the kid. I used to hide under the table and play with my cars, and I wouldn't play with my sisters. I have no problem spending time on my own. It's a skill I recommend everyone practice, because people don't like to be lonely and they fear loneliness. There's nothing to fear with loneliness. And these skills enable me to be able to stand alone. And it's a skill that many, many successful people have honed over their lifetime, because there's two things that people don't like. The general population don't like to be ridiculed, and they don't like to be ostracized. I don't worry about what other people think, because I don't mind standing aside and being ostracized, because I ostracized myself as a child. It was a strategy, it was a coping strategy, a coping mechanism of when I was a young lad, that I could trust no one except myself. So when we look back at this trauma, which it was, childhood trauma, and there's many elements of it, i.e. the death of my mother, the treatment, abuse effectively from my stepmother, the lack of support from my father, all these things, I could easily look back at that and play the victim card. It enabled me to become a stronger person because of what I'd gone through. The abuse enabled me to say, never again. I will never let someone treat me like that. I'm my own person. I'm in control of my own destiny. Someone else is not going to control it for me. It's a skill that's invaluable to me. And it's invaluable to you once you develop it. And develop it you can. It's something as easy as, who am I? What's happened to me? How can I make that stand for something? You can't feel any way that you don't allow someone to make you feel. You're in control of that. They can't make you feel any other way than how you let them. I have a choice to see that a certain way. I have a choice to allow that to direct my life. And that choice is available to you as well. And a friend of mine turned around and said, I'm fed up with this, I'm fed up with that. And it was all to do with work related. And I went to them, look, you have a choice. And he went, what choice have I got? And I said, well, everything's a choice. And I want you to imagine you've got a problem similar to my friend there, who where you've got something that's bothering you. It feels like someone else is in control of your life. And this was particularly, this one was his boss. His boss was in control of his life. He was all-controlling boss. And I said, you have got a choice. And he said, what choice is that? And I said, you have a choice whether to go into work today or not. And he went, oh, don't be ridiculous. Then I won't be able to pay my bills. I said, that's the choice. When you realize that it's the consequences of the choices that you make, whether you can live with them consequences or not is a different kettle of fish. So the consequences of not going into work is you won't get paid. So therefore you can't pay your bills. And if you can't pay your bills, you'll probably lose your house. And then your family and yourself have got to go and find somewhere else to live, probably in rented accommodation, and probably go on the dole. Do you want them consequences? Or the consequences of the decision of going to work and having to put up with an idiot? That's the choice. And it's the consequences of that choice that are important. So when you look at your problem and you go, okay, I've got a choice here. And that problem is whether to continue in a relationship or not, whether it's to change your job, whether it's to leave or whatever the case may be. Think about the consequences of the choices that you're making and think about the consequences of the choices that you could make. If you can live with the consequences, then you know the choice is the right choice. But once you realize, I choose to do this, oh, it's life-changing because I choose to go to work. So when you go to work and you see your boss, I'm actually going there because I want to go there, not because I've got to. And that, I promise you, will change everything about how you see the world. And this is not just one thing. This is everything. Choices are everything. but just can you handle the consequences? That's it. And this leads me nicely on to what we're seeing play out in the public eye with Harry. Certainly not so much Meghan, but Harry, because it's Harry that's come out with a book. It's Harry that's coming out with all the accusations about his family and. But here's my take on it. Having had similar situations, losing my mother, being treated differently, and having an upbringing that was not conventional, he's got a choice, right? He chooses to write a book. He chooses to expose all these, what he sees as victimization. He sees it differently to how his perpetrators are. His brother sees it. His father sees it. His stepmother sees it. And other members of his family, and how the press see this. But can you imagine what it must be like for him to know that the press and the paparazzi had a direct influence on his mother's destiny? So the choices that Harry's making is to expose it. But there's a kicker. There is a kicker in this. And that kicker is that he's doing it for a reason. And it's not just one reason he's doing it. The consequences for him doing it are he's going to sell a shed loads of books. Now, his book was one of the best sellers of all time on its first release. Only pipped, I think, very similar to Harry Potter releases. So it's doing its job, right? His Netflix series netted him $100 million. Now, I had a conversation with someone the other day who came around and said, you couldn't see the correlation between Meghan and Diana. I can. The difference is if Diana was around today, she'd not only do an interview with Martin Bashir, she'd probably do a Netflix special for $100 million, right? Because she couldn't do it then. So consequences of even Diana coming out and exposing the royal family for what they were, but they don't allow Meghan to do it and Harry to do it. Why is it different? But the consequences for Harry is, well, I'm selling something. And do I care what they think? I want reconciliation. Yes, I do, but on my terms. And I think, will he live to regret it? No, I don't think he will. I think the royal family, to me, when I look at certain things now, I'd see William in a different light. I see Charles in a different light. I certainly see Harry in a different light. Whether I think he's right, wrong, or indifferent is irrelevant. But I do understand why he's doing it. I do understand that me talking about my past in these podcasts is no different to what he's doing. The difference being, I'm not naming and shaming my family in a way where, because my family are just a normal family. They're not the royal family. They're not elevated. That's the difference between his story and my story. And when we think about it logically, can you imagine what it must have been like for him to go through that? Walk behind his mum's coffin, not cry, have to smile at the public and shake their hands after his mum had just died. Have the press hound his wife. I know that's not childhood trauma, but still trauma. Having your brother treated completely differently to the way you are. I know most sibling rivalry is there, and you will turn around. Everyone's probably got, my older sister was the favourite. We've all been there, right? Even us three, my sisters, Helen, myself, and Anne. I used to think that Anne was Dad's favourite. We used to fight when we were little, trying to get attention because, there's sibling rivalry. But we're not talking about that. When Chris come along, there was a direct difference, huge difference between the way I was treated and the way he was treated. And you're talking about Harry being, he describes it as, I'm there to give him a kidney or a lung or a heart. He's the spare part to keep the future king in line to the throne. And how bizarre is that? Think about that for a minute. Would you want to be in someone's shadow, regardless of the choices he's made and the consequences he's got to live with? Just think about that for a second. I want you to think about your life trauma, what goes on and how you deal with it. How are you going to deal with your trauma? We all have trauma, right? It might not be childhood, but we all have trauma. What are the choices you're going to make? How's it going to define you? Will it define you in a positive way or a negative way? That's the choice.